Where I got the gambling notion when I was just a kid in Iowa, but I guess it came natural. As it is said, there is a little larceny in every one. Dad had gave me permission to build myself a little building on the back of the wood shop it is. So I gathered a scrap of lumber and what have you, and after some weeks I had a shop of my own, such as it was. Dad gave me a padlock for it. Also, he gave me a lot of old tools. I have a suspicion those tools had seen better days, but to me they were just wonderful. Well, back to my get-rich-quick scheme. Those tools had seen better days, but to me they were just wonderful. Well, back to my get-rich-quick scheme. I took an old buggy wheel in my shop and rigged it into a roulette wheel, or what I thought one was like. I painted numbers on it and was in business. Of course, there wasn't too many pennies in circulation among the young fry, but I was after what there was. I sold numbers on the wheel at 1 cent each, and whatever number the wheel stopped at, that number won. The winner received all the money but 1 cent, which was my commission. I done real well for a few days until I had all the pennies, which, by the way, I knew of my gambling adventure. That's the reason I still have the skin on my back. One of my customers moved from town to Wisconsin. He left me owing me 7 cents. I would have taken out bankruptcy, but I didn't have enough money. Us kids had great times. We made our kites, and believe me, they flew better than the ones I see the kids trying to fly these days. I'm sure I had my kite out as far as a half a mile many a time. We also made our own balls we played ball with. We saved string, and there was lots of use in our young days. If we could get a hold of a small rubber ball, we would wrap our string around it and keep wrapping until we got it the side we wanted it. Then we started sewing it all over in all directions over and over, so the ball never did ravel. Our main ball game was one old cat, or just plain workup. We didn't choose up sides. Each one was on his own. When the batter was put out, he went to the field, and the catcher became batter, and the pitcher became catcher. And that is the way we always advanced. It sure was lots of fun. After another game we all enjoyed a lot was ante over the building. In this we chose up sides, half the players on one side of the building. The string ball was, or soft rubber ball was thrown over the building, and if it was caught, all would run for the other side of the building. And the one with the ball would throw the ball at one of the opposing team, and if he was hit, he then became a member of the other team. Of course, all this time, the team without the ball was scrambling to get to the other side of the building. That was the way we played in those early days. We had no notion of setting fire to the schoolhouse like so many kids do nowadays. In the early days, butter was shipped to the stores in what was known as firkins, and it wasn't always the best tasting. Mother churned quite a lot of butter from our Jersey and sold it to Reinhardt's store, mostly in exchange for groceries. She did the same with eggs. Quite a lot of butter from our Jersey and sold it to Reinhardt's store, mostly in exchange for groceries. She did the same with eggs. Ma's butter was liked by everybody, and Reinhardt got to selling other people's butter, saying it was Mother's. It was hurting Mother's name as a butter maker, so Ma and I got a bright idea to put a stop to it. I took a block of wood, and with my knife I cut crazy notches and bunches of notches and grooves in it, and Ma used it to stamp every pound patty she sold, and that brought her butter to the proper standing as before. This winter of 1973 and 74, there seems to be an unusual lot of sickness, mostly colds, which brings to no one thought of going to a doctor for just a cold. There was as many old remedies as there was people, I guess. Some rub goose grease on the chest and put you to bed. I remember Mother saving the fat from a skunk I had caught, and this was used in place of goose grease. Her folks had used it in her young days, she said. Also, I can well remember on 2 or 3 different occasions she put my feet in a large wooden pail of very hot water, which had ginger or mustard, I do not know which. Then she wrapped quilts around me, so the steam came up under the quilts around me, until I sweat until I was sure I was up under the quilts around me, until I sweat until I was sure I was dying. Then bundled me in bed. I guess I lived, though, as I'm still here. Some ate lots of onions or garlic to avoid getting the cold. I think that would have worked, as no self-respecting cold would come near that awful stink. I think it would take off like a dog with a tin can tied to its tail. It sure worked. Stopping the coughing, and above all, it was nice tasting. So we didn't have to have your mouth pried open so to get to pour it down you. One of the remedies of my childhood for a sore throat was an old dirty wool sock wrapped around your throat. I guess the dirtier the better. It was guaranteed to kill or cure. I never heard of anyone dying, but there was some complaining because they didn't, by the way some socks smelled. Personally, I have used them, and the milder ones with good success. And when all our children were little, over 50 years ago, when they'd start to get a sore throat, they would come to their mother and ask for a wet rag around their throat. And I can honestly say the results was very good. By morning, the throat would be okay generally. It was known as the cold compress, and often we crushed ice and folded the end of the Turkish towel around the ice and put around the throat with excellent results. Think of the millions of dollars that would have been saved today. I personally don't recall the locust flights of the early days, but I've heard some pretty weird stories about them. There is no doubt their destruction ability and the great damage done by them at times. One old guy said he took off his coat and hung it on a fence post and went to fight locusts. And when he came back for his coat, all that was left was the buttonholes. Those locusts sure were greedy, huh? I still have in my possession a bamboo box made by my cousin Alec Johnson while he was in the Spanish-American War of 1898. This box was made of one joint of bamboo about 2.5 inches in diameter and about 1 foot long. In it is still the long letter to me, 2.5 inches in diameter and about a foot long. In it is still the long letter to me and several seashells and a few native coins. I still prize it very highly, as I was only 8 years old, and it was in answer to a letter I wrote him. Here's one from our farm at Ann Lake. We had a well that it was curbed with boards running up and down, with two by fours every 4 feet to hold the sides in place. Well, the water got to smelling bad, though it seemed to taste all right, but we could hardly drink it for the smell. About this time, Brother Jim came to visit us. He was convalescing from an injury received while breaking on his right hand. So at this time, it was still in a bandage. However, he said he would help me one-handed in cleaning out the well. I rigged up 3 poles over the well with a pulley up close under them. I had no pump, so as we pulled the water up with a rope and pail. The top of the well had a door or lid we raised when getting water. I ran a rope through the pulley with the snap in the end of the rope. This was snapped to the bail of a pail. The other end of the rope was fastened to the whipple tree, and our old horse, Sam, was to pull up these pails as I filled them with dirt. And the other end of the rope was fastened to the whipple tree, and our old horse, Sam, was to pull up these pails as I filled them with dirt and rocks. Jim stood at the well top, and when I said haul away, he'd tell Sam to get up, and when the pail arrived at the top, Jim yelled, whoa. Sam stopped, and Jim emptied the pail and brought old Sam back, and then lowered the pail down again. Well, one time I had a pail full of rocks, one or two nearly as big as my head, and another smaller. When the pail got to the top, Jim yelled, whoa, Sam. But it was about dinner time, and old Sam was hungry and didn't stop, but headed for the barn to start at the tip. The pail spilled all the rocks, but thanks to Jim, he jumped and kicked the well lid so it fell, and the rocks came down on the top of the lid, for it's a pretty good chance I wouldn't be typing this. A lot of dirt had sifted down from behind the curbing, and there was about a foot or more of loose dirt, and when I got down to the bottom of that, I found where the smell was, a rotten rabbit. So you see, we had been drinking rabbit soup for quite a while. Well, after I got all the loose dirt out, I worked a crowbar down nearly 2 feet. Then I put in a half stick of dynamite and lit me back to earth. He slammed the lid, and we got back. Boom! And I had plenty of loose dirt and rocks. And when I got that all out, we had lots of water, a good supply, as it was about 6 foot deep, and really soft and sweet, and it wasn't perfumed. We then bought a pump for the well. Oh, I must tell you the story how I accidentally shot my father with a .22 repeating rifle. This happened around about 1924 or 25. It was the summer, and Sister Letty and her husband Jake and their 3 sons were visiting us. also Paul and Moore, and were there with us. And that with Alva, also Paul and Moore, and were there with us. And that with Alva and I and our 4 children made quite a houseful. It was a beautiful day outside, but like a madhouse inside. 3 women getting to dinner and all talking at the once was making a noise like a flock of ducks quacking on a pond. Then consider what it sounded like with those 7 kids all yelping like a pack of wolves. So Jake and I thought it would be a good time for a little target practice. So I got my .22 rifle, which was a slide action repeater and a box of 22 short shells, and we went outside. On the farm in those days, all had outside toilets, and we were no exception. And Minnesota, and going into it in the winter and brushing the snow off the seat and getting out of there as fast as it was physically possible, gave one the impression he had been in a deep freezer. But in summer it was the opposite. It was hot and mucky and swarm of flies to pester you, and I honestly can't speak too highly of the odor. I should say, though, it was a nice building with a half moon cut in the door and one on each side at the gable. If these were meant for ventilators, I can assure you they were failures. For that reason, the door was always left open only when there was someone in it. When Jake and I went outside, the toilet door was open. We started throwing up tin cans, which I was shooting at. Sometimes as many as 3 times before it could hit the ground. I had been shooting for several minutes, and at this particular can I was getting 3 shots. But as I followed it down with my gun sight on the 3rd shot, I was lined up with the toilet door, and it was shut. I tried to stop by my trigger finger, but it had gone too far, so I shot. At once I realized that someone had gone in to the toilet that we hadn't seen. I hollered, "Who is in there?" No answer. Again I screamed, "Who is in there?" Then a weak voice said, "You got me that time." I ran to the toilet and on rubber legs and jerked the door open. A few clothes ravelings hanging to it. The door and his clothes had stopped the force of the bullet, and it had not made a mark on him. He had come out while our backs were turned and gone in the toilet without speaking. I still think the Lord took 22 shells that day instead of long rifle shells, which I most often used. Well, I was close to going into shock and took the rifle back to the house and was pretty shaky all for some time. My wife saw a couple of flies in our trailer home today and about had a fit. So got the fly swatter and went gunning for them. It is wonderful how we old people forget our younger days. When I was a boy, gunning for them. It is wonderful how we old people forget our younger days. When I was a boy in Iowa, we had flies in our homes. Not by the dozen, but by the thousands. Things were not sanitary in those days, and there was barnyards at most of the homes, as even the town people raised pigs, chickens, and had a cow or 2 and a horse or 2 besides a dog or 2 and cats ran everywhere. So flies were everywhere, and every time the screen door was opened, hundreds of flies came through the door. When they got too plentiful, everyone in the family grabbed a dish towel or some other cloth they could wave, and someone would stand eyes to the door, and all were quite close. The door was open and a swarm of flies were chased out of the house. This would be repeated several times, and then there was room for the family. We also used sticky fly paper, but within an hour or so there wasn't any room for another fly to get on the paper. We had a poison paper that was laid in a saucer of water, and when the flies drank it, they were dead. 2 flies. Oh, how awful. Well, I've had a few days to wander around in my upper story, and I've collected a few items that might be of interest. When we lived at Ann Lake, and Hazel was about a year and a half old, she climbed upon an old chair that had and I've collected a few items that might be of interest. When we lived at Ann Lake, and Hazel was about a year and a half old, she climbed upon an old chair that had a loose leg that I had neglected to repair. I had just stirred up a fire in our airtight heater. The chair leg gave away, and Hazel fell against the stove with her cheek and forehead and pushed herself away with her hand. She got a terrible burn and very large blisters. I went to town and asked the druggist what was the best to put on it. There was no doctor in Ogilvy. The druggist gave me linseed oil, which we saturated a cloth with and put on the burn. Of course, the burn hurt her, and she would tear the cloth off. About this time, a guy by the name of Bill Lem came to our neighborhood. He told us to use mentholatum and it would leave no scar. We did, and he was right. No scar, but every year for several years thereafter, at about the same time, it would itch and break out in a big blister. When she was 7 or 7, we moved to Chicago, and our family doctor prescribed something that looked like tar. When it would itch, she would put that on her face, and it didn't blister. She was a grown woman before it stopped itching. While we lived in Chicago, Jim, George Watson, and I went fishing on the pier that ran out into Lake Michigan. We rented a net that was several dozen shiners on it, then we'd lower it again. In about an hour, we had caught over 250, and Brother Jim and George were very generous and said they didn't want to deprive me of the pleasure of cleaning them. Well, I did, and Jim's and George's family and our family ate the whole mess for supper that evening. By the way, they were wonderful. While at Brother Jim's place at Cody, Wyoming, I took his rifle and went for a deer hunt. There was a bluff about 2 miles north of his home I thought was a good place to hunt. Well, it turned out that I was 2 or 3 months too late, as it had evidently been winter quarters for deer, moose, and elk as a sight. I spent some time matching pairs, intending to go back and for some of them, but never did. Some were beauties. Oh, the mysteries of life. While we lived at Ann Lake on our farm, every spring when the ice would go out of the lake, there would be hundreds of large snapping turtles sticking their heads up to get air. Now my question is, how did they get along all winter, buried down in the bottom of the lake? I never heard an explanation for it. Now, while living here in Tucson, there is about an acre of low-lying ground a block east of our home, and frogs and toads bury themselves there for months at a time. When a heavy rain comes out, about an acre of low-lying ground, a block east of our home, and frogs and toads bury themselves there for months at a time. When a heavy rain comes out, they come to lay their eggs and go back and bury themselves. They lay eggs in a little bird pool by our water hydrant, and they hatch two little tadpoles, then turn to little frogs and head for the low ground to bury themselves. Just another mystery I'd like to an answer to. At my age, I still get curious about things. Back when I was a kid in Iowa, us kids had lots of fun with games or other amusement. I have failed to mention we made darts. Oh, not like the dart game of today. Our darts were made out of wood shingles. These darts we threw with a stick with a string with a notch in it, which we placed in a notch in our dart shaft. With a little practice, we got very good with them and could throw them as far as 100 yards, and quite accurate. Another thing we all had got good at was with the sling, like David killed Goliath with. It was lots of fun, but it would be a poor thing for the kids today. No, we had wide open spaces where I lived, but the kids, such seems to be the nature of a lot of younger generation. I don't think I mentioned how we played pump, pump, pull away at school. All played, both boys and girls. We played it often other places besides schools also, and had a lot of fun. I haven't seen any children playing this game for many, many years. I wonder why. When I was about 7, bought a second-hand lady's bicycle. All those kids rode it but Letty, and she was too small. I couldn't sit on the seat and pedal it as my legs were too short, so I stood on the pedals and done quite well, but Ray didn't want me to ride it, so I stood on the pedals and done quite well, but Ray didn't want me to ride it, saying I was wearing out the pedals that way. I continued to, though, and one day Mr. Washburn, a neighbor, helped me on the seat and told me to push the pedals as they came around, then gave me a push, and the way I went. It was hard for me to at first, and I was pretty slow, but finally I got the hang of it, and from then on I got along fine. I suppose to raise disgust. While I was in the militia in Basin, Wyoming, in 1909, we boys bought a bicycle, and one day I tried to make a corner too fast, left leg real bad, and practically tore my pants leg off. And a lot of people seen it happen and sure had a good laugh. I've been idle sometime, so we'll get back and put down some of the things that have come to mind. I well remember the game of flinch, which was all the rage when I was a boy of 10. Especially at parties. As many as 15 could play it. But the most exciting play with the French deck was bird of trade. There were 150 cards in the deck with 15 different numbers from 1 to 15, and 10 of each numbers from 1 to 15, and 10 of each number. 15 people were given 10 cards each, and the object of the game was to get all 10 of the one number. So the trading started, and of course each person was yelling so many cards to trade, and the yelling and trading continued until someone had all the cards alike. It sure was a madhouse and well named. There were many other games we kids played, like checkers, dominoes, and little party games that we kids liked but I suppose too mild for the generation in these days. There's one game played in my young day that was extremely popular, and I'm sure it still is and always will be. It has gone by many names. Years ago it was show or post office, and we kids had a slobbering good time, as it was composed of kissing the opposite sex, and everybody left the party thrilled and happy. Today it is called mooching. Well, anyway, that is what keeps the world going around. Many times as a boy I laid on the ground and watched the old highway tumblebug roll into balls, dry horse manure. It was certainly interesting as they worked backwards in pairs, making the ball with their hind legs and feet. The purpose for the ball I have never learned. It is possible, I suppose, that they had eggs in it waiting to hatch, but your guess is as good as mine. But to a kid it was sure interesting. We had great times killing garter snakes around the sloughs and ponds. And many times I have seen a garter snake open her mouth, and little baby snakes no more than 3 or so inches long go in her mouth. And we would kill her and with our feet squeeze them out. I think that the herpetologists will argue against this, but I know what I saw, and I did regardless of what they think. And buttercups, flowers, also sweet williams. Oh, what fun we kids had. Being as old as I am, I have seen a lot of changes, and especially in the younger generation. What a change it is, unbelievable. They don't seem to be interested in any of the games or simple pleasures we kids enjoyed. I guess that is as it should be. Everything is a-changing, even the mind. I don't know whether it's for better or for worse. We kids all had a good whistling time every spring. We would cut a limb from a willow tree, and by pounding it with the back of our knife handles, we could slip the bark off. Then in the inner wood, we carved it in by pounding it with the back of our knife handles, we could slip the bark off. Then in the inner wood, we carved it in a certain way and cut a notch in the bark and slipped the bark back on, and we had a real whistle that was sure loud and clear. But we were run out of the house before we drove the parents crazy. About all the noises we hear nowadays are cars, planes, a fire whistle, or a police whistle. But in the old days, it was different. We heard the frogs croaking, birds singing, the loon hollering, geese honking, ducks quacking, crickets chirping, gophers whistling, the quails whistle, Bob White, the train in the distance, and last but far from last, Mother calling. Our highway winters were quite severe, and us boys all wore what was known as German felt boots. The felt was about a half-inch thick, and one wore a rubber shoe over them. At night they were wet inside from sweat, and by the way, they didn't smell like any perfume I ever smelled. We put them around the stove to dry out in the night. One heated oats and filled the boots to dry them out. Any way you did it, it was a nightly chore and necessary. I haven't seen a pair of these boots in 75 years, and I'm quite sure they don't exist anywhere, for if they did, I think I could smell them. On February the 2nd, 1911, I left home in Minnesota for Tower City, North Dakota, where I was to go to work for my uncle Charles Nichols, Dad's brother. I had worked for him also in 1908. I arrived at Tower City on my train about 7 p.m. and after looking around town to see if any of my cousins were in town and finding none, I decided I'd walk out to Uncle's. He lived 8.5 miles from town and had no phone. I figured that paying $2 for a livery was foolish, as I was to only receive $10 a month in board until spring. Work opened, then I'd receive $35 per month. There was a full moon, and it was about 20 degrees below zero, but that was common for this time of year. The country was covered with snow, which had melted a little, then froze, so it was almost like as on ice. I found after I had got out of town a short distance that the regular road was not used. People drove across the prairie and fields wherever they desired. The only sign of a road I could see to follow were the little holes made in the snow by the very sharp corks of the horseshoes. I had on a long overcoat which was very warm, as it was muskrat lined, and had a high shawl color. In those days I could walk or run fast, and I struck out at a fast walk, and sometimes I was light off the snow. It seemed I was seeing a million stars. It was a night never to be forgotten. I could see farm buildings in all directions, but not closer than half a mile. Ahead I saw a house that I figured a friend of by the name of Bill Woodard lived in, so I headed for it. But when I got within about a quarter of a mile of a big black cloud started to raise in the sky. I had never seen anything like it in my life, and for a few seconds I couldn't make it out. Then it dawned on me it was a real old North Dakota blizzard coming down from the north. There was a haystack about 200 yards ahead, so I started on the run for that, figuring if I was caught in a blizzard, I would set fire to the haystack to keep from freezing. Figuring if I was caught in a blizzard, I would set fire to the haystack to keep from freezing to death. When I got to the stack, I was only a couple of hundred yards from Bill's house, so I decided to make a dash for it. I ran with all the speed I had, and just as I got in the road about 4 rods from the house, the storm hit with a whirling wind, sleet, and snow. It was impossible to keep my eyes open, but I fought my way toward the house and ran against it, striking it at one corner. If I had been 1 foot to the east, I would have missed it, and this story would never have been told. Bill heard me thump the house and came to the kitchen door just as I was crawling on the porch on my hands and knees. He grabbed me and a hold of me. Who else is out there? I said I was alone and afoot. I will never forget how he turned white and said, "My God, man, you don't know what a narrow escape you had." Up to that then I hadn't realized how lucky I was. I stayed that night at Bill's as the storm raged all night with 40-mile wind. It turned to rain and then froze as everything it hit. By morning it was quiet and clear as a bell, but at 40 degrees below zero, and every telephone wire and telegraph wire running east and west for 200 miles was down. Also hundreds of poles. The wire was so big as round as a ball bat with ice. About 1 p.m. Bill hitched his team and took me up to Uncle's place. In my life, I have never heard real hair-raising stories about people caught out in these blizzards, but this one is the most important one to me. I have seen many blizzards through the window of the house, and that is far more pleasant. This spring of 1911, while working for Uncle Charlie, there was a barn dance several miles from his place, and my cousin Howard, whom we called Fatty, was a regular dance fiend and thought he couldn't miss one. As the horses had worked hard all day in the fields, Uncle refused to let him take a horse and buggy. Howard got real angry and decided to ride his bicycle, but had no rear binding twine around the rim of the wheel. He had the window open and the lamp sitting on the floor, and he came downstairs for something, and the wind blew the lamp over, spilling oil all across the floor, setting it afire. Uncle and Aunt were in the barn milking, and Cousin Bill and I were playing catch with the ball. I threw the ball to Bill, and he missed it, and as he ran by that end of the house, he stopped and began to yell fire. I ran in the house and upstairs, then ran down and grabbed the pail and started for the well. Bill was still standing there yelling fire. I slapped him and told him to grab the pail. Just then Uncle came running from the barn and asked where is the fire. I told him upstairs. He ran in and Uncle came running from the barn and asked where is the fire. I told him upstairs. He ran in and upstairs and threw the pail of milk on it, and it was out at once. Uncle relented and told Thaddeus to take the horse and go. He was so disgusted. An awful lot of big barns in Dakota were really built with barn dances. When they built them, the hay mow floor was laid as nice as any house. Then during the spring and summer, they gave these barn dances, of course, charging admission. And in this way, the barn was paid for in a few years. Sometimes there were as many as 300 couples to these dances. When I was around 17 years old, my parents let in 100 couples to these dances. When I was around 17 years old, my parents, Letty and I, went to visit the Wilson family one Sunday. They lived about 3 miles from us. After we left home, our horse Florrie, who was in the pasture, decided she wanted to go along. So she broke a wooden gate and followed. When we got to Wilson's, we put all 3 horses in the barn. As usual, I had my rifle, so Charlie Wilson, who was my age, went hunting. When we finally got back, we found my folks had left quite a while before, but left the Flory so I could ride her home. By the way, she had been a quarter horse and could really run. Well, I got on her back, on her bare back without a... If you had seen me riding that old logging road, my rifle in one hand and the other possibly waving around, you would have, say I would put these Western TV Indians to shame. With my long legs dangling, well, all went well until we came to a creek about a half a mile from home, and then the trouble started. She had one bad habit. She never wanted to get her feet wet. So she danced around on the bank with me kicking her with my heels and slapping her, trying to get her to cross. She finally slipped into the creek, throwing me over her head into the water. Well, she came out on the right side, and so did I, and just as mad as a wet hen. I felt like shooting her, but she wouldn't let me catch her, so I went home a wet Indian. I was about 8 or 9 years old when I had a bet with Sandy Wilson, an old Civil War soldier, about something. I lost the bet, and of course I couldn't pay up. So Sandy caught my dog Nip and put him in his corn crib. He got a good laugh peeking while I slipped around and stole Nip back. Box socials were all the go when I was a kid, generally put on by some church branch or school. I went at one of them. I had a whole quarter, and the box was raffled off. I went to 22 cents, and the other guy quit bidding, so I said 23. Of course, the crowd laughed. I got the box of goodies, and in it was the name of a girl that brought the box. I was supposed to share it with her. A little later, another box was offered, and no one bid, so I said 2 cents and got that also. I opened both boxes and stuffed myself with pie and cake and many other fine foods. What good times we had. It was fun when some certain girl's box was up to sell, and the girl had tipped her beau. It was her box. Of course, he sure wanted that box, and the box was up to sell, and the girl had tipped her beau. It was her box. Of course, he sure wanted that box, and the guys all ganged up and bid against him, and won the price up to $1 or even $2. And that was a lot of money in those days. But all went home happy. One of my very early chores was to build a fire in the kitchen stove of mornings. I didn't relish it too much, as it got me out of a warm bed quite early. But I lived through it, and my dad sure deserved to get all the rest he could. Dad worked as hard as any man I ever knew. In winter, when the roads were icy, it was necessary for the farmers to keep the horses sharp-shod for hauling grain to town. I will remember at those times my father actually worked. He done more hard work, back-breaking work in one day than the average man does now in 3 or 4 days. I have seen my dad walk all bent over real bad from a bad back for weeks from shoeing horses. Once when I was 10 or 11 years old, Jim was home on a visit as he was working at Brooklyn, Iowa. His gal Margaret, who he afterwards married, was coming for a visit to meet our family. Our lawn was pretty ragged, so Jim put on Dad's bee bonnet as the bees were terribly cross, and proceeded to mow the lawn. I was on the front porch and a bee came buzzing around on my head. I ran in the house and out the back door to the cold woodshed and got a shingle. I came back on the front porch and told him I declared war on the bees. On the front porch and told him I declared war on the bees. He said I better get in the house out of their way. About that time along came Mr. or maybe it was Mrs. B and started to buzz me. I struck at it several times, but the shingle just fanned it away. So I took off down the road as fast as I could run, but you know, that blame bee liked me and kissed me just above the right eye. Well, by the time I got back to the house, or shortly after, I forget which, my eye was swelled shut, so I had a pretty aspect to be presented to my future sister-in-law. Well, anyway, everybody had a good laugh. You know, sometimes when I'm watching TV and see the ad where a guy is cutting tree limbs of logs with a chainsaw, I feel like crying. When I think of the many days I sawed wood with a crosscut or one-man saw, I think if I was ever to wish to live any of my life over again, it would be to go back and get rid of those old saws and use one of these chainsaws. When I was home, I cut wood, most of the wood, and believe me, in that frozen north, Minnesota, it took a lot of wood. After I left home, Dad hired a man to come with a saw rig and cut wood for the winter. When I was quite small, our mare had a little colt, and we kids were for sure happy to show our colt had. It happened that someone tied the mother's halter rope too long to the manger, and as the colt was allowed to freedom of the barn, it often went into the stall by its mother. In some way, the rope, being long, got looped around the colt's neck. So when we went to the barn one morning, we found the colt strangled to death. It was a sad day for all. You probably heard of the sidewalks of New York, but the sidewalks I'm writing about are the boardwalks of my hometown when I was a boy. These old boardwalks were something to be reckoned with. For quite often they had a loose board, and if you stepped on it wrong, you would have a wreck. And when it was over, for quite often they had a loose board, and if you stepped on it wrong, you would have a wreck. And when it was over, well, you had a skinned shin or a knee, if you were lucky. Otherwise, a arm that you thought was broken at first. Also, these boards had knots in them, and in summer the sun boiled the sap or rosin out of these knots, and when we were careless and stepped on it with our bare feet, we ended up doing the Highland Fling or some other fancy dance. So we kids developed a sixth sense, so we learned the old boards walk so well we could run on them in the dark and miss every loose board or missing board, which happened sometimes. It was an obstacle course, but we met a friend who was working for the U.S. Reclamation Service north of Glendive, Montana, on the Yellowstone River. He enclosed a check telling me to come right out. He had a job for me there. I got ready as fast as I could and took the train for Glendive and then the stage to the U.S. project. I didn't present myself to the boss, as I figured on the balance of the day visiting with Charlie. One of his jobs was to drive a one-horse spring wagon loaded with hot food to the men working in the stone quarry about 2 miles from camp. So I rode with him. There was a high road and a low road. He took the high road to give me a better view of the country. Most of the food was hot and put in 5-gallon lard cans with quite tight lids. Me a better view of the country. Most of the food was hot and put in 5-gallon lard cans with quite tight lids. All went fine until we were quite close to the quarry. Then a dynamite blast spooked the bronc, and he erupted about on a Nichols with dynamite and jumped off the ledge we were riding over. Down we all went, bronc, wagon, food, Charlie and I. I wasn't hurt, but oh, so hot as the old lid exploded on the coffee can, and I got a full blast. For a minute or two I was busy as the dog was scratching fleas, pulling my clothes away from my body to keep from blistering. Charlie wasn't so lucky, as he sprained his ankle and he had and it was hot too. The wagon was on his side, so the bronc couldn't make any time trying to run, so we easily caught him and uprighted the wagon, and after gathering up the spoils, we went on to the quarry to let the men know they would have to come to the camp for their dinner. Charlie was laid up a few days, and I filled his job as barn boss until he was able to go back to work. I was then put on the job known as bull cook. That was peeling potatoes, carrying out garbage, keeping plenty of fuel in the cookhouse and all the men's quarters for the whole camp. Also, each day I hitched a bronco to the stone boat and hauled 2 barrels of garbage and slop from the kitchen to a ledge near the river. The kitchen to a ledge near the river. The contents of these barrels I dumped over the ledge. Then returned the stone boat and barrels to near the kitchen, then led the bronco to the river for a drink. One day I thought, why should I walk when I had a horse to ride? So I climbed on the bronco's back. He bucked a little, very lightly, then walked on like a horse should. The camp was laid in one street, with a row of houses for the laborers on each side. Someone seen me coming and hollered to the other men, so by the time I got up the street between the houses, practically every man was out of the houses watching me. I had no idea why until I had put the bronc in the barn and returned to where the men were standing in groups. Then I was questioned from every direction. Said I had no intention of spoiling my reputation, so never got on him again. After a couple of weeks, I quit the job there and went on to visit Brother Jim and family at Quiddy, Wyoming. But that story I have already told about. I think there is one thing that happened while I worked at this place that no man can explain. One day after a dynamite blast in the granite quarry, some workers were prying some of the rocks apart where they were cracked with a crowbar, and on parting the rock, they found a large, pure white toad in a round, hollowed-out pocket. The toad was alive, but died in a few minutes after being exposed to the sun. They brought the toad after being exposed to the sun. They brought the toad into camp and parted the granite rock, showing where it hadn't been for the Lord knows how long. Oh, how little we mortals know about this old world. It does no harm to do a little dreaming and letting your imagination run wild, and I am no exception to many others that have done so. So on many of Alice and my trips across the states. In traveling between Minnesota and Arizona, I have done some of this dreaming in crossing the prairie countries of Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Wyoming, and Colorado. I've let my mind go back 100 years and in imagination seen the rolling prairie as I thought it was like then, and I sure enjoyed what I was seeing. As far as in all directions were thousands of buffalo peacefully grazing on buffalo grass. Off to the right on a little knoll are several deer munching away at the grass, and off to our left is a herd of antelope, which are gracefully loping along, bound for parts unknown. There is also a sly wolf slipping along in the grass, hoping to find some feeble animal or some stray buffalo calf that is unable to keep up with its mother. But wait, the coyote has just scared up a jackrabbit, and so the race is on. But what the finish was, I can't say, as they just went over outside over a small hill. We passed many prairie dog towns, some covering many hundreds of acres. They are quite chubby and cute as they run from one whole stop on the mound that surrounds the hole to their den. They sit up and give a little bark, and at the slightest sign of danger they flick their short tail and disappear down the hole. Oh, there is a little ground owl sitting on a mound. They also share the homes with the prairie dogs. And occasionally there's a rattlesnake crawled in the shade of some grass. Their main diet is baby prairie dogs. What is this I see coming fast over a little hill? It's several Indians riding bareback and chasing after buffalo, shooting them with arrows. Down go 2 or 3 buffalo, and the Indians stop and proceed to skin and dress out the meat with their flint knives. They now load the meat on their ponies and head for their camp as they knives. They now load the meat on their ponies and head for their camp, as they never kill more game than is needed for the necessities of life. We are now stopped waiting for the buffalo herd to cross our path, and it might be quite some time before we proceed. There is now another scene that is not so pleasant. Here comes a number of buffalo hide hunters to slaughter the buffalo as only a white man can do. And with their heavy 50 caliber sharp rifles, they are dropping buffalo right and left. Behind them comes a heavy wagon with the hide skinners, for in the white man's greed they are after the almighty dollar. I close my eyes for a minute to blot out this scene. A little farther on we see the teepees of the Indian village, nestled in the... everyone seems to be busy. The squaws have just come up to take care of the hides and meat. The braves have just arrived with all is in tranquility. But wait, what is this I see? Way off in the distance. It's a wagon train. Hundreds of covered wagons plodding west, which means the beginning of the end of the noble Indian way of life. For white men have been known to spoil about everything he plans to do. The sky is turning red in the west as the sun is going down. So all at once I'll come back to reality as my dinner bell just rang, and it's time to eat and hunt a motel for the night. Now that I'm back on Earth, I've been doing some reminiscing of the things of 75 years ago, by the millions, but today have all practically disappeared off the Earth. My question is, where are they all gone? The pop bottles in those days had the rubber stopper down in the bottle. Don't ask me how they got it there. Stopper was attached to a heavy bent wire which, when struck with a hand driving it down in the bottle, if you wish to recork the bottle, it was pulled the wire up again. I've only seen one of these bottles in 65 years. While I'm on the subject, where are the hand coffee mills, the buggy whips, the dynamite canes we made so much noise with on the 4th of July, the two-blade cabbage cutter for making sauerkraut, the apple peeler more for making sauerkraut. The apple peeler more had me working so many times. The little B and BB shells we used to shoot in our 22 rifles. The black snake whip, the cap pistols of the old style, hundreds of kinds of toys we kids played with. The millions of China doll heads that were so common on all homemade dolls, and the old boot jacks, the Deviline whistle that was so shrill it would raise the hair on one a mile away, hokey pokey corn cure, old shaving mugs on the shelves of the barber shop. There were hundreds of patent medicines that are no more, but wonder of wonders, they have been replaced with thousands of other patent medicines that are guaranteed to cure anything from the itch, fallen arches, piles, runny noses, snake bites, or ingrown toenails. And look no more homemade soap like Mother used to make, but who cares? We have 1,001 different kinds of washing powder that will clean your clothes 10 times whiter than white, or your money back. And if you will send in the box top, and 25 cents, the company will send you a child's toy that your kid can kill a neighbor kid with. And that will help to cut down on the population explosion. After all, it appears this old United States has been turned upside down, and maybe all the old things are covered in the city. One had faith in his fellow man and could trust him. What a wonderful world this would be if we all studied the Bible and then tried to live up to it. It was required that each of us kids was to come straight home from school each night. Well, one day when I was 11 or 12, I came home by the croquet ground back of the hardware store, and as no one was playing, we kids grabbed a mallet apiece and went to playing. Well, time had a way of taking wings and flying, and it sure did that evening, and before I realized it, it was turning dark, so I hightailed it for home. Dad asked me where I'd been. I told him playing croquet. He said, "Young man, don't let this happen again." I made a big mistake and told him it was nowhere okay. He said, "Young man, don't let this happen again." I made a big mistake and told him it was no worse for me to play croquet than him. He grabbed me by the collar and applied the side of his shoe to the seat of my pants, twice, which lifted me off the ground. No, I didn't stop to play croquet anymore. You see, I got smart. I don't think that I mentioned that after working for Uncle Charlie in Dakota in 1908 for a couple of months, I decided to go to Miles City, Montana to work. Brother Ray was in tailor business there and had wrote work was plentiful. I got a job with a man by the name of Joe Eckhorn, a gardener. I enjoyed the job very much and worked 10 hours a day at hoeing and other garden work. He worked on a neighboring farm. One night Ray told me there was a medicine show in town and they needed prop men to change the scenes between acts, and that he had got me and he and I a job, and that way we could see the show free. I was on the job every night, and it would have been hard to keep me away. There was a pretty little gal I took to be about 16 that played the violin beautifully between acts. I sure fell for that for her, and she apparently thought a lot of me. So whenever we had chances, we would sit and talk. She was a real lady and very nice, and she and the show manager begged me to join the show as one of the actors was quitting when they were moving on. I'll have to admit it to a lovesick old farmer boy, it was very hard to know, but Ray helped me. He said Ma would sure take it hard if I joined. So I did bid her goodbye, and with tears in my eyes. Time marched on, and I got over my puppy dog love, and a year later I was in the militia and stationed in Basin, Wyoming. And it being just a small town, there was little entertainment, so we soldiers that were free, when a passenger came to town, we were always there, just for a place to go or something to kill time. Well, this particular day I was there when the train arrived, and who got off the train but my old lady love and the show troupe. I shook hands all around, and my heart threw in a few extra thumps for my gal. She took old lady love and the show troupe. I shook hands all around, and my heart threw in a few extra thumps for my gal. She took 5 tickets out of her purse and gave me so I could see the show each night free. I floated back to camp on Cloud 9 with all my soldier boys eyeing and owing about my girl and how lucky I was. Well, I went to the show the first night, and after the show I had a nice visit with my heartthrob. At 12 o'clock I went on guard duty relieving Gus Anderson. Gus said he was going over to the saloon about a block away for a beer before retiring. In about 3 minutes he was back laughing like a hyena in the saloon. He gave me no reason, just to go, he said. I went, and what I saw wanted me to crawl in a hole and pull the hole in after me. There was my lady fair, drunk as a fool could get. The upper part of her dress torn half off, one breast hanging out, her hair in a tangle and hanging down. She must have had a partial plate, for some of her teeth were missing, and as to age, it was anybody's guess, from 40 to 60. I got the rousing of my life and gave my tickets to the soldiers, and I went into hiding until the show left town. It taught me a lesson. There is never a son of Adam so wise he can't be fooled by a daughter of Eve. The summer I worked in Miles City, Montana. Ray coaxed me to go home that fall to help Dad with the wild horses rounded up by the cattle ranchers. Buyers from eastern and middle states came and bought them by the carload. With each car shipped east, the railroad allowed a man a free pass for each car. I got a pass with a buyer by the name of Louis Kiff. Then when the freight started with about 60 cars, there was about 150 men on it. It was impossible for the conductor to weed out the bums without a pass, so he let all ride. Most were headed back to Dakota harvest fields. There was one passenger coach on the train, and that was full of drunken, noisy bums, so I, with about 100 others, went on top of the stock cars to ride. It was a fast, others went on top of the stock cars to ride. It was a fast train with a right-of-way. Passenger trains sidetrack for us, as the law required that all stock had to be unloaded in so many hours to feed and water. Jamestown, North Dakota was our stopping place. There we were held up a few hours while the feeding and watering went on. Then back to the car tops I went with others, but we ran into a sleet and rainstorm. Those that were headed, those that could headed back to the coach, but the brakeman and I were much closer to the engine, so we tried to make it to that. But the cars tops got so slippery at 65 miles an hour, jumping from slippery car to another car. Even an experienced brakeman gave it up, so we raised the door on the feed racks in the stock cars and crawled in and shut the doors. When it stopped raining, we crawled out and were safe. At St. Cloud, Minnesota, I left the train and caught another train for Ogilvie, and home safe and sound, but the trip was quite a thrill. While on the farm one spring, Dad had a bull calf about 8 months old that got in the clover field one morning and ate so much he got so bloated up he looked like he would burst. He laid on his side groaning and bawling, and Dad did not know just where to a place to stick him to let out the gas. We had a patent medicine known as McConnell's heart. One would have to be a fire eater to enjoy it. Well, Dad and I got 2 tablespoonfuls of this fiery stuff down that poor calf. He got to his feet, threw his tail in the air, and let out a beller and headed down the pasture at 90 miles an hour. And with every jump he blatted and passed gas. So by the time he had traveled 100 yards, he was so thin he looked starved. Yep, he got well. You have often heard that there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Well, my friend, I know that is not true, and I have proof. As my wife, son Jim, and his wife Dorothy, and their children Gary and Janet were with me when I put my hand down into the end of the rainbow. Son Jim and his wife Dorothy, and their children Gary and Janet were with me when I put my hand down into the end of the rainbow so that some color showed on my hand. There was no pot of gold. We were coming from Sells, Arizona, in our car to Tucson, and there had been a rainstorm over the mountains at Tucson, and as we came into the outskirts of the town, the sun came up out from under the clouds, and a very beautiful rainbow appeared a short distance ahead. And as we came around a corner in the road, there was the rainbow in a shallow ditch beside the road. I pulled down a little in the ditch and put my hand in the rainbow end. Time has a way of slipping by, and it is now April 15th, story to an end. I went to the hospital in November 1973 and came out in December 1973, having had quite a bout with pneumonia. I was supposed to be well when I left the hospital, but was quite weak and didn't seem to gain any strength. And on April the 14th, 1974, I again entered the hospital with pneumonia and was released on April the 24th, 74. But this time I was informed I had cancer in the upper part of my right lung. Dr. Locke had already made arrangements for me to start cobalt treatment. So that same day I started them, and all told I received 32 treatments. The radiologist considered the cancer had been destroyed. I was very weak, and Alda's health was bad also. We talked it over, knowing that there had to be a change made, as neither of us was able to wait on the other. We got in touch with our son James and his wife Dorothy, and we made an agreement whereby we would pay for all material, and Jim would build a room on the side of their mobile home, size 21 foot by 14 foot, in Little Falls, Minnesota. Jim came with his truck, and our son Bob, who lives in Tucson, each took a truckload of our personal belongings to our new home in Minnesota. Our new home is completely finished, and a beautiful home it is. Jim done a regular cabinet maker job on it. We are very comfortable, and have free access to their mobile home where we take our meals, and they are at liberty to come in our room at any time. Our son Don and his wife Marion live just 4 miles from us, and Don's 2 daughters, Denise and Donna, and Jim's daughter Jeanette are all close by and all come to see us quite often. We lived in Little Falls from 1938 to 1951 and had many friends, but they, like ourselves, have grown old and can't get around. Many have died or in old folks' homes, so we see very few of them. My wife, Alda, has improved wonderfully since we came here, but requires the doctor's care and checkups about every month. I have lost quite a little weight, walk but little. I get checkups every month or two, and my last showed by the x-ray that I have no use at all of the right lung. It causes no pain, but I do get short of breath easily. I expect that some that read my story will wonder if I am ready to meet the Lord. I can assure you I am. I made my peace years ago, and the last year has been a very happy one for me. I've lived 84 years, some very good and some not so good. But I have no complaints. I'm happy. I hope all that read this autobiography will enjoy it and get a few hearty laughs from reading it. I did, as I typed. Oh yes, I shed a few tears also. The autobiography will enjoy it and get a few hearty laughs from reading it. I did, as I typed. Oh yes, I shed a few tears also. But that is what life is made of, laughs and tears. If I am allowed one last wish, which wish is, it would be that the Lord will richly bless every one of you that have read my life story. I regret the misspelled words and poorly written sentences. Some were mistakes, and some I simply didn't know any better. So with this I'll close this story this 15th day of April, 1975. May God bless all of you.